one side, we have the Warlocks, the guys that don't care about anything, that don't limit themselves in any way, shape, or form. They use every dark magic out there from Fel to Void. They summon minions and consume their own life in order to damage others. On the other side, we have the Shadow Priests that are in a similar way chaotic, but instead of physically damaging others, their main focus is on driving their enemies insane using the old god way, while also being able to pull in beings from the void to attack and turning themselves into shadow. Now, if these two incredibly dangerous and chaotic classes faced off each other in a lore duel, who would come out on top? Shadow Priests are really one of the vaguest specs or classes that we currently have in the game, and they were especially hit hard with the retcons these past few years after the Chronicle. The entire area around the Void has always been confusing, but lore of Shadow Magic was kinda retconned, and at the moment they're just kinda lingering around. Realistically, while Shadow Priests are a spec, they really should be a class of their own, as they pretty much have nothing in common with the regular Light Priest. Now, I know the logic they were going for, and that is still relevant, and that is that the Light and the Void are two sides of the same coin, so they're kind of the direct opposites while being the same thing. So we have the Light that only seeks one real truth, while the Void tries to show many, but realistically in the past there was a lot less nuance, and the Void was just straight out evil chaos, while the Light was benevolent and good. Now, I'm not just giving you the lore for this. Why this is relevant to Shadow Priest is that the general consensus has changed drastically, especially with the introduction of the Void Elves, and at the moment, Shadow Priests aren't some crazy monsters worshipping the old gods, but they're just harnessing the chaotic energy that is the Void. Now, don't get me wrong, they never really were old god worshippers, at least the ones we play as, but now it is a bit more clear. So to put it simply, they embody the Void and utilize its power, while at the same time not letting it consume their mind, which is actually quite an achievement. To understand this, you need to look at the fundamental difference that the Shadow Priests have to any other caster. Almost all casters focus on physically damaging their opponents, draining their life, casting fire at them, while the Shadow Priests are mainly manipulating their mind, driving them insane, and fighting them to their own fears and inner chaos. Now, you can observe this with most of the spells they use. It is either causing fear within them, driving them to insanity, mind controlling, or manipulating. Now, I know in game this is really strange because this fear lasts like 5 seconds and they chuck bolts non-stop, but realistically, this could have much more serious consequences. When you think about it, this is exactly how the old gods work. They rarely use brute force. It is mainly to playing on their opponent's fears and getting them to believe them, and then utilizing minions to do their bidding. Now, when you think about this, it really sounds incredibly overpowered, as they can turn a warrior into a mindless robot with a single spell, but I do feel like their power would definitely wane when they deal with some of the more extreme classes, such as the Death Knights, Demon Hunters, or even Warlocks, that are just crazy as it is and are just much more resistant to it. Other than this, the Shadow Priests can also summon minions from the Void, and they can use them to attack, and they do have actual abilities that physically damage them. Don't get me wrong, they aren't only mental warriors, but that is the majority of their class and what makes them unique as opposed to other casters. Usually, Shadow Priests will be former priests or former wizards that discover the powers of the Void and realize they're mentally strong enough to wield this chaotic power without having it corrupt them entirely. Now, on the other hand, we have the Warlocks. I'd say if you wanted to know what this class is all about, all you would have to do is just quote gul'dan, who said, "Behold those who have power and who are not afraid to wield it. Behold the Warlocks." This is literally it, and usually the Warlocks were the bad, the evil guys, and only recently did we, the Horde and the Alliance, start using them for good, but people have always been weary of them even today. Generally, mages and other types of spellcasters have their own rulebook, what is safe to use, what is forbidden, but the Warlocks literally just threw it out the window and just decided to chase as much power as they can possibly get. Literally, nothing is out of their bounds and nothing costs too much. Now, of course, this has a price, as this chaotic power is forbidden for a reason, because it is either unethical, meaning you would have to sacrifice other living forms, or they would have to sacrifice their own spirit, turning themselves into a husk of their former selves. Most warlocks used to be other spellcasters. No one that we know of just decided to turn himself into a warlock from scratch. So generally, these were former mages, or in the case of the orcs, shamans, usually all the really powerful ones, that realized that damn, there is just so much power potential that we have here, so let's just screw the consequences, the rules, and let's just embrace it. The warlocks that you know of usually use the powers of fel magic, as it is the most chaotic and destructive. However, as you're also aware, they can use any other power they can get their hands on. They are not fel elitists, but instead, the warlocks will embody whatever makes them stronger. This means that they can also wield the power of the void and even death magic. As opposed to Shadow Priests, the Warlocks do damage, and that is their main focus, using all types of spells to drain life directly out of their enemies, to turning enemies into ash. Most importantly, they utilize their power in order to summon minions from everywhere, both the Fel and the Void, and generally, they can summon incredibly powerful beings. The Warlocks that you play as do seem a bit goofy summoning these tiny minions, but we have seen Warlocks summoning essentially the most powerful beings ever into the world and opening trans-dimensional portals to transfer entire armies. However, that would of course be comparing extremes. So now that we have the comparison of the two classes, who would win in a duel, a Shadow Priest or a Warlock? This might actually be the most difficult comparison out of all the class duels, because this one really depends on how powerful an individual is, as the contrasts really are insane. A random Warlock is definitely not going to destroy a really powerful Shadow Priest that fully embraced the Void, while a random Shadow Priest dabbling into the powers of the Void is not going to mind control and cause fear in Gul'dan. To really examine this, we need to look at what is more powerful, Void or Fel, and yeah, that is seriously difficult to answer, maybe even more so than the duel itself. Fel magic is actually a result of a clash of the light and the void, so by that logic, void is more powerful as Fel is just a derivative of it, but both can be incredibly destructive, and those using Fel destroy planets, while void lords also consume planets. However, I guess we can say that we did manage to defeat a massive transformational Fel army, while we had not defeated the Void Lords, and they still may be the most powerful beings that are around in our universe. Both magics are really powerful though. Now, we have to look at the most important point, and that is that the Warlocks actually kinda counter Shadow Priest, while it isn't the same case vice versa. Shadow Priests fully embrace the power of the Void, and we can see this with them turning into Shadow and all their abilities being based on it. The Warlocks, on the other hand, aren't all that extreme. They merely tap into the Void, but nonetheless they're able to use it, and some Warlocks specialize in it, which could turn them into Shadow Priests easily. I'd say this is a really powerful counter, because when you think about it, using the Void is all about wielding this magic that drives everyone crazy, but you understand it so it doesn't drive you crazy while it does the opponent. Well, this wouldn't work that well, because the Warlocks also understand how it works and they wield the Fel as well, which is just as dangerous, so they know how to counter corruption and just really chaotic magic, as they have been wielding it since forever. Now, we have seen the Void and Fel battling each other. In fact, that is why the Burning Legion was created in the first place, to wipe out the Void Lords, and we had seen both sides winning in this conflict. So because of this, it is incredibly hard to say who would win. My thoughts are that the Void is more powerful, but both of these classes wield the Void, therefore knowing how to counter it, while Shadow Priests don't wield the Fel. So, the conclusion of a duel between these two would entirely depend on the power level of the individual. Previously, when I talked about the Death Knights, the Demon Hunters, this was a lot easier to answer because they were created in the same way, are quite similar on average, and are their own orders, but really anyone can be a Warlock or a Shadow Priest. Extremes of both classes would win if fighting the average, but in my opinion, if we faced off an average Warlock with a Shadow Priest, the Warlock would come out on top. Thank you for watching. Check out the world revamp happening by clicking on the screen and check out Doronsmovies Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.